So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charles Gauthier, and I'm the President and CEO of the Downtown Vancouver Business Improvement Association. It's my pleasure to welcome you here today on behalf of the DVBIA, a member association that supports, promotes, and represents the shared interest of over 8,000 businesses and property owners in the central 90-block area of the Downtown Vancouver BIA. I'm trying this teleprompter. Oh, there, it's starting to work now. Before I tell you about today's event, I wanted to say thank you to our very generous sponsors, Boughton Law, and we have a representative here, Luca Chiton, who's our vice chair, and Brooke Pooney Associates. It's because of their support that we were able to bring you this programming. So today we are launching a report called The State of Downtown, which is a project that we have wanted to do for a very long time. I'm kind of pegging it at about the last 10 years. Last year, with the arrival of our new data analyst and visualization specialist, James Anderson, we finally got our chance. James' skill set allowed for a detailed analysis of many different data sets, which meant that we were able to pull together a comprehensive and holistic snapshot of the health and vitality of our downtown core. James will talk about how he did this in a few minutes. Many of the large downtown districts in the United States produce an annual State of Downtown report. I'm not going to list all of them, but some of our favorites, Philadelphia, Chicago, and Seattle. But we are now the first major Canadian city to produce a comparable report. That's right. Where was that come from? While we won't be able to cover everything that's in the report, in this panel presentation today, we aim to give you a high-level overview of key happenings from 2018, as well as the trends that our experts see emerging. We have a diverse audience in attendance today, and I want to acknowledge we have a number of counselors and one school trustee here today, so thanks for joining us. But because we have a lot of people, a variety of backgrounds, we'll endeavor to cover these sometimes nuanced topics in a way that makes sense to all of you. That means avoiding jargon and acronyms and finding connections that matter to you and your business. This report isn't intended to be a marketing piece, although I suspect it will be referenced and shared widely. It does celebrate the success of our downtown, but it also identifies challenges that need more attention. It sets important benchmarks for us that we can use for years to come and will help the DVBIA set our strategic direction in the future. It also provides one central hub for thousands of data points to come together and tell a story about our downtown. And while it's not intended to act as an advertisement for downtown, the stats do speak for themselves. Downtown Vancouver is doing very well. And I'm going to change the script here because one of our experts came up and told me this. With over 5 million square feet in office space coming online, rather than 4, over the next 5 years, we are seeing unprecedented opportunities to build a more robust and inclusive downtown. I'll let our panelists speak more to what's on the horizon for downtown, but I'll simply say that 2018 was a pivotal year for downtown and the DVBIA, and we look forward to the upcoming next few years and the role we will play in downtown's evolution. So just a few housekeeping items. In just a few moments, I will hand it over to James to tell you about his process and methodology in putting this report together. Then we will dive into the discussion with our panel of experts, and we're hoping to allow time for questions from the audience, which can be submitted through our online tool Slido using the code #StateOfDowntown. But we're mindful of the time and that many of you will be attending our annual general meeting immediately after this event. So please do submit your questions on Slido and vote for other questions that you'd like to see answered, and we'll do our best to make time for them. And now I'd like to invite James Anderson to the podium to tell you more about the creation of the State of Downtown. James.
I haven't said anything yet, so thanks, Charles. So the State of Downtown summarizes information from over 30 different sources. So a lot of these sources have always existed, and maybe some of you in this room are very familiar with them, but what we've done is we've taken all that information, brought it together, curated it so it's in one concise report, so it's an easy snapshot of what's going down in our downtown. That wasn't on purpose. We reviewed dozens of American State of Downtown reports, mostly because they're the most widely known ones at the time. and other literature to develop a framework based on indicators that best represent downtown's health and vitality. We use 3 types of sources to inform our reports: city and annual industry reports, news articles that highlighted key events, raw data from Statistics Canada, the city, and others. Then we organize our report into 4 chapters: people, business, property development, and urban experience. You'll see that within each chapter, there are numerous sections. For example, in the urban experience section, we talk about urban parks, cultural events, and modes of mobility. Within each section, we provide a regional overview for context and then narrow our focus as best we can to the DVBIA's catchment. The report refers to 3 geographical areas based on the scope and granularity of the available data. We look at downtown as defined by the city, which includes parts of Cole Harbour, Gastown, and Yaletown, the entire downtown peninsula, which encompasses both downtown and the West End, and then, of course, the DVBIA's catchment, the Central 90 Block downtown core. The majority of data is from 2018, unless it's stated otherwise, and it's based on the best information at the time of the completion of this report. However, since this is our inaugural report, we felt it was important for context to include the 2016 census. During this process, we consulted industry experts, including some of our panelists today, to ensure the reliability of the information. We also formed a communications committee to review the flow and readability of the content. This year's State of Downtown sets a baseline for future reports. As downtown's narrative evolves, we hope our community, everyone here in this room, continues to work together to develop innovative ways to address challenges and leverage opportunities to make downtown a welcoming and vibrant place. Thank you to everyone involved in putting this report together, especially our panelists for taking the time to share their insights today. And of course, our graphic designer, in-house graphic designer, Josh, who really brought this to life through the graphics. On that note, I hand it back to Charles.
Thank you, James. Again, in the interest of time, we have condensed as much as possible to give you an overview of our process. James will be available after the presentation if you'd like to learn more, or you can email him at james@dtvan.ca. Now, I'd like to invite our panelists up to kick off the discussion. Please help me to welcome, and maybe hold your applause to the end. I'll just introduce them, and they're going to actually grab their seat as I introduce each one of them. Michelle Babiuk is Translink Senior Manager of Transit Planning. Michelle, over here. Gwendal Castellan, Tourism Vancouver's Manager of Sustainable Destination Development. Shivam Kishore, Vancouver Economic Commission's Manager of Technology Sector Growth and Partnerships. Andrew Petrozzi, Avison Young's Principal and Vice President of Research, BC. And Claire Smith, Vancouver Convention Centre's Vice President of Sales and Marketing. Yes, please applause. So remember, we have the Slido tool if you want to start thinking of some questions. But I'll start the first round. And I'm going to start with Andrew. And again, thanks to all of you for making time today, being with us. And we did feel, again, this was going to be quite condensed. And it is a bit of a trial run for us to consider what we might do for next year. So Andrew's got the first question. I'll give some context. And as he shared with me just before I stepped on stage, more than 5.1 million square feet of office space, a historic number, will be added downtown in the next 5 years. So your question is, what is fueling commercial office developments, and how has the tenant mix changed since the early 2000s?
Thank you, Charles. I will try to get over this very complex topic in relatively short order. I will try to speak slowly as well. Little bit of context, though. A balanced office market is one with vacancy generally between 8 and 10%. Interestingly, that has not occurred in the city of Vancouver since 2005, other than a brief exception in 2015 at the height of the most recent development cycle when tenants were shifting around the market. Currently, We are at slightly more than 2% vacancy in a downtown market, not including Yaletown, of almost 23 million square feet. Now, demand for space from a range of tenants has led to the record low vacancy that we are now experiencing, which in turn is leading to upward pressure on rents, which is one condition that helps developers and institutional investors decide whether or not to invest in the construction of new office towers to address the lack of supply that characterizes the downtown Vancouver office market today. A record number of them have decided that time is now. But a quick history lesson. The downtown market has been in this position before. In 2007, 2008, vacancy was about 2.5% for basically 2 years. And the reasons for this are similar to now: increased demand from users and a lack of new supply. But there was one distinction. Back then, downtown development sites were being acquired by residential developers who were outbidding office developers. This led to a lack of new commercial office space being built downtown in the 1990s and into the early 2000s, which in turn led to the tight vacancy we saw in 2007, 2008. However, Vancouver City Council at the time realized that this was an issue and had subsequently placed a moratorium on residential development in the downtown core. This allowed developers to get back into the market to start to address the low vacancy that had manifested in 2007, 2008. But then along came the Great Recession in the US in late 2007, which froze up the market. Now, it didn't really impact tenant demand in downtown Vancouver, which basically weathered that storm with virtually no impact. Although some of our suburban office, particularly Richmond, were not so lucky. But what the recession did cause was a pause in the institutional decision-making and investment necessary to launch the new office towers in that period after the moratorium was introduced. But by 2011, 2012, the investment had started flowing, and 3 years later, we had the first substantial downtown Vancouver office development cycle in decades, with more than 2.7 million square feet delivered between 2014 and 2016. Now, as mentioned earlier, during that last development cycle, vacancy rose briefly and peaked at 9.8% in mid-2015. And again, remember, a balanced market is generally considered between 8 and 10%. But since that time, it has steadily and rapidly declined to slightly more than 2% today, back to where we are in 2007, 2008. Now, the leasing success of that first wave came largely from accommodating the pent-up demand and growth that had accumulated throughout the 2000s and into the 2010s, which is why it was absorbed so quickly and relatively painlessly. But we had only expanded our office market to accommodate that pent-up demand and to a lesser extent cater to current tenant needs. But we didn't really include much space for future growth. We were playing catch up after all. Nor did we foresee the large new disruptive players coming to our market, such as co-working and the arrival of big tech, that on a scale that has generally been alien to downtown Vancouver's office market, and building floor plates. As a result, this next development cycle, which is already underway and will start delivering later this year, has, by Vancouver standards, been supercharged by almost 20 new buildings totaling more than 5.1 million square feet in the next 5 years alone. And that's just what's already confirmed and under construction. There are also several other projects still in the permitting process, and who knows what else may come forward in the months and years to come. Now, who has been driving this growth for the past 10 years? It may come as a surprise to many of you who the primary drivers of office space leasing has been in terms of total square footage leased. I'm sure many of you might think it's tech, and you would be correct. But this is only a recent trend that's emerged in the past 5 years. Tech only started to play a notable role in downtown Vancouver in 2012, when it was involved in approximately 20% of the total square footage leased downtown. Prior to that, from 2009 to 2011, it had hovered at slightly more than 10%. Now, starting in 2014, tech regularly clocks in at about a third of total downtown office leasing by square footage. That's a huge increase, of course. But alone, was it enough to trigger this massive second wave of development? Maybe, but let's just leave that for a second. For the past 10 years, outside of technology, downtown Vancouver's office market has been largely driven by 3 key professional service tenant types. Leading the way has been financial, accounting, and insurance companies, which on average, in any given year during the past 10, have been responsible for roughly 20% of all downtown leasing activity by square footage, reaching its high in 2013 at 28%. Tech that year was only 20. Law firms, which have remained very important to downtown office leasing activity, average about 12% of total leasing activity in any given year in the past 10 years. They peaked in 2010 when at more than 20% of all downtown leasing in terms of square footage was by law firms. In comparison, tech was just 6% that year. And finally, architectural and engineering firms, who have been involved in roughly 11% of total downtown office leasing by square footage in any given year since 2009. They peaked in 2011 with 23% of total downtown office leasing. And again, tech that year was just 12%. And of course, co-working, which you've all heard and read so much about. But prior to 2017, co-working represented just 1.3% of leasing activity downtown on a square footage basis. Now, that's spiked to 15.6% in 2017 and 8.4% in 2018. But it has had nowhere near the impact yet that one might think. Now, one important consideration of what I've said. I've not included the announced pre-lease commitments in the new buildings that are currently under construction in these statistics that I've cited. So that would include Amazon in the Post and at 402 Dunsmuir, Kabam in Vancouver Centre 2, Spaces in Deloitte in 400 West Georgia, and WeWork in B6. Now, there are several other office types that also exist downtown, of course, which contributes to the ongoing vitality and strength that comes with a diversified downtown office market that is now, more than ever, better positioned for the future and will hopefully meet the occupancy needs for the years to come.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. And we did have a pre-meeting about what we were going to cover, but that was excellent. Thanks for providing that insight. So the next question is to Shivam from the Vancouver Economic Commission. So again, the context, BC's tech hub is located downtown, a major draw and a proven factor in increasing overall productivity. So your question is, what makes downtown a tech hub? What are the benefits for tech to work here?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, what makes Vancouver a tech hub? I mean, clearly, it is a tech hub now because 1/3 of all occupancy is occupied by the tech ecosystem, so to speak. I think another point also is, if you look at the numbers over the years, tech is now about 24% of all jobs downtown is offered or governed by the tech ecosystem, which is more than the forestry and the resourcing industry combined. So it's significant in terms of the volume of growth that the tech ecosystem is driving downtown. I think what's contributed to it is a bunch of factors. One is, of course, the arrival of the global Fortune 500 companies here. So you've got Amazon, you've got Facebook, you've got Oracle and Microsoft all downtown. And that has driven significantly the response from the local ecosystem, which has also increased considerably in the last few years. I think Deloitte does a study where they look at the top 500 growth companies across North America. And 4 of those companies are, again, located within the downtown area. And if you look at the breadth of the companies, they don't follow any particular order. They follow all sort of different. You've got a fintech firm, you've got a firm that does corporate food catering, you've got a firm that does car loans. So it's quite a wide spread of how the ecosystem is evolving. I think one of the biggest advantages, or why I think Vancouver as a city has been able to sort of grow in this sector, is because of the proximity. It's very unique because if you look at all other major cities that also have growing tech ecosystems, you can't really walk within 30 minutes to essentially half or 80% of your entire tech ecosystem. I mean, you go in the elevators today, and within 5 floors, you can have 5 different organizations, all doing tremendous work that allows this, exchange of ideas and exchange of concepts to happen. Or you go to a coffee shop and you can meet people from different organizations and engage in organic conversations. I think that plays a massive role. We can't underestimate or understate the value that the walkability or the proximity of the ecosystem plays a huge, huge part. And I think if you look at the trends, it's only growing. I mean, Vancouver is doing a fantastic job of growing its downtown core organically again. That's allowing for this innovation to foster. You've got great support from educational organizations, SFU being downtown, UBC having a downtown presence, couple of other BCIT having a downtown presence. So that adds the much needed talent to the ecosystem, which allows for that growth also. And then combine that with the presence of the financial sector downtown. I mean, it's a great recipe for the perfect donut, right? Because it's brilliant. Now you've got financial sector, you've got an equally growing tech sector, and the education organizations all working together to help grow the ecosystem. So I think that's in a snapshot, I would say, the Vancouver downtown or the Vancouver general tech ecosystem.
That's great, thank you. We're going to change gears because we realize that tourism plays a key role in the success of downtown and our city and our province and probably the country, if I could add it to that list. So Gwendal, I'm going to give you the context and then answer the question. Vancouver's tourism has consistently experienced growth year over year. Latest figures show that Metro Vancouver welcomed over 10 million visitors overnight. What are some of the challenges in accommodating tourism growth? I guess there's two questions. And how does Tourism Vancouver plan to address those challenges?
All right, thank you. I feel like just downtown, that idea of the walkability, and we have the Active Transportation Summit happening in US for the last 2 days, really speaks to something that's a value for visitors, and so that's quite an important part of attracting people here as far as the experience. And then I just wanted to reference the office space. I feel like we're 10 years behind where you are, and that we want a little bit of that pixie dust and be in your situation, hopefully sooner than in 10 years. I looked back at our tourism master plan, which we had developed in partnership with the Vancouver Economic Commission, the City of Vancouver, in 2013. And that's just when we were really just before hitting 5 consecutive years of growth in Vancouver. And even then, we had identified that hotel capacity and the number of hotel rooms downtown was an issue, something to keep an eye on. And tracking that over the last 5 years, the importance of that particular issue has really floated to the surface and became even more clear last year when we did a 2030 scenario planning report, which looked at all the supply and the demand side factors in Vancouver and looked at the potential for growth and where we might land. We kind of came out of that with an identified Goldilocks scenario of about 2% growth, which would get us from 10.4 million visitors last year to 13.4 million by 2030. And landing on that number, it allowed us to really look and backcast, saying, how would we accommodate that extra 3.5 million visitors in Vancouver? Do we have the capacity? Do we have the infrastructure? And particularly, what does it mean if we don't grow the number of hotel rooms, which have shrunk? In the report, you've identified some key properties like the Empire Landmark on Robson. We know the Four Seasons will be closing later this by 2020. Those are really significant losses that will in fact impact our convention industry, and we see it as not just impacting the tourism industry, but also having follow-on effects to other industries. So industries such as the film industry, there's a lot of temporary accommodation needed to service that industry. We have crews that are moving in and out. It's not just Vancouver residents who are working in the industry, so there's impacts to other industries in that sense. Where I feel like we're 10 years behind with offices is that last year Council made a policy statement in July, really identifying that this was an issue and that we would not have no net future loss of hotel rooms in Vancouver. And that's kind of where we were, I think, around 2008, 2009 with office space. And we're really looking forward to figuring out what are going to be the ways that we can attract investment into new hotel developments to stem that loss, but really to meet that growth and be in lockstep with the future economic growth that we foresee, both for the industry and for Vancouver in general.
Okay, great, thank you. And I'll come around round 2 for some other questions. My next question fits in nicely. We have Claire here from the Vancouver Convention Centre. And so the context is VCC's West Building recently celebrated its 10-year anniversary. Since opening, the space has hosted over 5,500 events, welcomed over 9 million guests, and generated over $2.4 billion in direct spending for BC over the last decade. Yeah, they're all two questions, I'm sorry. What are some of the VCC's notable accomplishments over the past 10 years? And what can we expect for the future?
Great. Well, thank you. And I think it's appropriate following Gwendal. It's really a lot collectively for us to be proud of as a destination. I'm going to talk really about three accomplishments that the Convention Centre, both East and West, have really contributed. And I think first is a huge impact to the increase of event volume in the city. So you mentioned 5,500 events in 10 years, but that really equates to about 550 or 560 events a year in all different shapes and sizes. We're very excited about the breadth of those events and really the type and nature of events that we've been able to attract, from international congresses in the medical field to creating a permanent home for the TED conference, which has been with us now for 6 years and contracted well into the future. Those really help anchor the business for the city and ensure that sort of hotel success well into the future, but really puts Vancouver on the map, not only for conventions, but builds our reputation as a world city. And so when we opened the West Building, and Ken Cretney, who I know is our CEO, is in the room, he really put a goal of becoming a global leader and destination of choice as one of our main tenants, and we're continually rated in the top 1 or 2 convention destinations in North America and in the top 10 worldwide. And that's a huge accomplishment for not a large city with challenges around compression. So that reputation piece has been really important for us. But I think the biggest thing that our team is proud of is the impact that we have, not only on Vancouver, but on the entire province of British Columbia. The economic impact, of course, and I think as Charles mentioned, $2.4 billion of economic impact, which is a really strong engine to power a lot of businesses, create a lot of jobs in the city. But I think one of the things people don't really hear about is the impact of hosting meetings in really the exchange of knowledge and the access for Vancouver residents to be able to take part and be involved in some of these events. So if we're hosting a conference on a specific type of science or medicine, it really allows people locally or in the region to be able to take advantage of experiencing that where they may not have been able to travel before. But we're seeing more and more of the groups that are coming into our building really want to connect with the community in a meaningful way and transfer and exchange of knowledge. An example of that was a couple of years ago, we hosted the American Dermatological or Neurology Association. They ran a one-day free seminar bringing in all the world top neurologists to be able to educate the citizens of Vancouver on brain health and whether that's Alzheimer's or head injuries in children. So that connection with community and that outreach was never more evident in a week and a half ago when we hosted Women Deliver, which was a huge global meeting on gender equality, and their connection and outreach and the work that the City of Vancouver did in creating opportunities for people to engage and access some of that content live at our public library and connecting in community events is really exciting. So a lots more that we can expect in the future, some of the same, but we're really getting smarter in how we're using our space, and we're continually evolving based on the changing needs of how people want to experience conventions and the technology that's needed to be able to support it. So as Gwendal said, accommodation continues to be a challenge, but we are really taking a look at our business and making sure that we've got great events coming out well into the future, and we've got groups on the books until 2027, so there's lots to look forward to.
Great, thank you. And Michelle, you've been very patient on my right-hand side, and so I've got your question for you, but here's the context. Metro Vancouver's population is expected to grow by 1 million by the year 2040, adding 500,000 jobs. What types of service upgrades are planned to accommodate a forecasted increase in transit ridership? And you know there's a second part of the question. How will they impact commuting downtown?
Yeah, so some of the context for recent and upcoming service increases in the region is how transit ridership has been developing. So in the past 3 years in Metro Vancouver, we've had record ridership for transit across the region every single year. And that's been an increase of about 4 to 7% each year. What that means is in about just over 3 years, ridership in our system has grown by almost 20%. So that's pretty tremendous. Downtown Vancouver is definitely on the leading edge of that trend. So in just the past year in downtown Vancouver alone, we saw ridership on buses increase by 7%. On Saturdays, ridership on buses increased by 10%. So we're definitely seeing people come downtown, not just to work, but for shopping and recreation and other things. On the Expo Line SkyTrain, we saw about 4% increase in ridership and about 5% on the C-Bus. So it's been very, very successful in downtown and in the region due to increasing population, a very robust job market, increased fuel prices, and also I think a lot of pent-up demand from people in the region that have wanted to take transit for a long time, and the capacity hasn't always been there. So we've been partly reacting to that demand and partly shaping it. Recent improvements that have happened to help bring people to the downtown, one of the less recent but probably most visible is it was only 2.5 years ago that we opened the Evergreen Line, which has really opened up SkyTrain, fast, convenient, quick access to downtown for people in the Tri-Cities and the Northeast sector. We rolled out a new B-Line rapid bus on the Hastings corridor, so that's bringing people from East Vancouver and Burnaby, as well as others connecting from there to the region. We increased service on the Expo Line SkyTrain, which is the biggest transit pipeline into downtown. Rolled out service increases on a number of routes that are experiencing overcrowding, and improved the night bus network, which is something we've really heard from downtown businesses and residents from Vancouver and across the region that's really critical for their activities. Some of the upcoming service improvements we're expecting is on that new rapid bus on the Hastings corridor. There will be increased Sunday service starting this June 24th. We have 56 new SkyTrain cars, which are arriving now and have been put into service as they've arrived and are being commissioned. You've probably seen them most often during the midday right now. But we are planning, one second. You can expect to see peak service increases using those cars later this year and peak service increases next year on the Canada Line. We're really excited about that because those are going to go into the peak link on the parts of the network that access downtown, places that are choke points, difficult places for people to get into downtown during the peak today. We'll have extra capacity there. Another recent improvement actually is the C-Bus was brought up to frequent transit network levels of service, which means that it's now running 15 minutes a day for the majority of the day, every single day of the week. That's really groundbreaking for people because that's the level of frequency where you can just walk out your door and access a service without consulting a schedule. We have seen a lot of demand during the peak on C-Bus, and as the third C-Bus arrives and is commissioned, we'll be seeing extra peak service in the afternoon to address that demand. And then finally, we've heard that people are still very excited about night bus, so we'll be looking at some improvements for that very soon.
Great. It sounds like you gave us a lot of additional parts that we can add into the 2019 State of Downtown report. So something to report on for next year's report. So I'm going to do a time check. Okay. So I'm going to do the second round of questions, but why don't I mix it up a bit? I'm going to go to Gwendal for your second question. Feels like Jeopardy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The City of Vancouver's goal is to become the greenest city by 2020. However, tourism growth, especially an increase in the number of cruise ships, could contribute to a larger carbon footprint. There's been a lot in the media about that. What are some of Tourism Vancouver's initiatives to support sustainable destination development?
All right. Well, specifically to cruise ships, I mean, we have to look at what we can control and what we can't, and I really want to shout out to the port and all the leadership they've taken in installing shore power and the number of ships that are able to plug in when they're docked in Vancouver, and that has impacts on fairly significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. I think we were the third port globally in 2009 to install shore power, and also improvements to the airshed air quality. So the shore power, as well as they have an eco-action program that helps reduce the sulfur content in the bunker fuel, at least for the part that we can incentivize as they come into our airshed, and that has been increasing. Ideally, it would be great if all ships were doing that all the time, and the same thing with shore power. We don't have 100% of all cruise ships plugging in or able to plug in at the moment, but that's, I think, something where we could really set that as a desired outcome looking forward. Looking sort of more to things that we have a little bit more control out. Our members are really showing leadership. We have tour bus companies such as West Coast Sightseeing who've really made a big commitment to electrification of the fleet. Translink is also making that commitment to electrification. So those are ways that we can really start to affect the greenhouse gas emissions within the destination, and hopefully manage the volume of visitors, finding ways. So active transportation, again, is another way that we can really start to address that, and that's a real asset, I think, downtown. Things like the proliferation of AAA, high quality cycling infrastructure has a really big commitment. We did a partnership with Translink this year called Dine the Line, which really encouraged people to use transit to explore the region, and that had I think one of the things that's really interesting about that is that visitors are not necessarily moving through the regions at the same times as our peak period, so it's an opportunity to use the network that we have and the capacity that we have and make it more efficient. With cruise, a couple of years ago, we had some survey data that found that we had twice as many visitors who are using the Canada Line coming back to YVR than they were when they were coming from YVR to the cruise terminal. And so that, to me, shows a real opportunity in communication and really finding ways to demystify the process of taking public transit in Vancouver, improving signage, all the things that might really make a difference. And every visitor we get onto the Canada Line is definitely a significant reduction in emissions in the destination, and also reducing congestion in the city as well.
Great. I'm going to now, Claire, I'm going to go to you. I didn't want to break up the tourism piece here. There is increased global competition to book conventions. Furthermore, Vancouver is experiencing a hotel room shortage, which has consequently put upward pressure on room rates. It is only one question. What is VCC's strategy to address increased global competition and decrease in downtown available hotel rooms?
Yeah, and this is really building on what Gwendal was saying. You know, we really are challenged, and it's not just a capacity, but it's also a rate challenge that is driving down sort of our competitiveness in the market. We've been really changing our strategy around spreading the business now more year-round, so really looking and targeting those groups that meet in what might have been the off-season, because traditionally convention months are April through to October, which completely overlays with the cruise ship and the peak tourist times in the city. And so we've really been working hard collectively with Tourism Vancouver to make sure that we start seeing groups in January, February, March, and even December. We were talking about a neuroprocessing conference that we have in December, so we're so excited to be able to start to really work on groups that can come in when it is actually great value for people. They can enjoy the destination, and the weather and the climate really doesn't have a whole lot of bearing to what they're going to achieve when they're here for their event. So really trying to push the convention season and make it 12 months of the year, which we're starting to see and having success with. And then also targeting different markets that maybe not as rate sensitive. So you've probably noticed a lot of great corporate meetings that we've been attracting into the city, large size of groups, but they are maybe not as price sensitive, or international congresses where their delegates are much more accustomed to being in multiple hotels and different types of accommodations. So they look at home sharing, they look at a whole variety of different types of accommodation, and they're not opposed to traveling. So really looking at the different types of business that we attract, but really ensuring that we're pushing the season farther and farther into kind of what would have typically been the off season, which is working, but we're still playing a very strong role collectively in trying to ensure that we get more hotels and that we increase the capacity in the city.
Thank you. Michelle, are you ready for your next one? Okay. By 2050, Translink envisages 50% of all trips will be made by public transit, cycling, or walking. How does cycling and walking play a role in the regional transportation strategy?
Well, congratulations, Vancouver, you're already there. Thanks to a lot of amazing work by the City of Vancouver and its residents. The City of Vancouver already makes more than half of its trips by transit, walking, and cycling. And more than a quarter of those citywide are by walking, and about 7% are by cycling. And cycling's been one of the fastest growing modes. In the downtown itself, about 3/4 of trips in the downtown and the West End are made by cycling, transit, or walking. And walking is really the backbone of that, with about half of trips made by walking and 4% by cycling. And those modes work together. Walking really dominates, as you can see in the downtown, for short trips, about 1 to 2 kilometers. It's very competitive. It's the fastest and most convenient. And cycling for trips that are about up to 5 kilometers. It's very competitive. And with transit together, that can really allow people to both choose one that's more appropriate for their trip or make an entire lifestyle choice at the same time. So we've seen tremendous changes there. As a transportation planner, I personally think those modes are always going to be very competitive because they're just the most convenient for trips where destinations are close together, and that's certainly true in the downtown. We are very interested in hearing what you all think, though, the business community and Vancouver residents. We are looking at starting phase 3 of our investment plan to identify projects to implement the rest of the Mayor's vision for transportation in Metro Vancouver, and also looking to the longer term. We're kicking off our Transport 2050 planning process, and there's an online survey open now until September 22nd, and we'd like to hear from you what you think the role of walking and cycling is in the region. Translink specifically in downtown and outside of downtown has a role as a multimodal agency, so we provide some infrastructure directly. So for example, the bike and walking paths under the Expo and Millennium Line SkyTrain lines, the bike path or the bike bridge on the Canada Line bridge, the bike parking at Expo Line and Canada Line stations that's allowing people to bike and ride to a secure location, and we've had great take up on that. We're also cost sharing with municipalities, about $20 million a year, to help bring projects that municipalities see as key in their community to life, and then we have a policy role as well.
Great, thank you. Andrew, it's been a while. I'm coming back to you. The design and architecture of upcoming office developments is unique and seems to incorporate more green space. What types of amenities and design features are in demand now compared to 10 years ago?
Well, I mean, certainly we would see a lot more desire, certainly in downtown core, to be located on rapid transit. There's been numerous studies done that not only do the employees want it, but the owners of those buildings can demand higher rents. So as a result, downtown is fairly well connected on the rapid transit side. So it is one of the incentives that entices developers to build downtown because of its multiple connections with the multiple lines here, whether it's SkyTrain, bus, or C-bus. So the desirability of the location is definitely something. But in terms of what's interesting is because there was such a gap between the new developments and the older developments, the buildings that were built in the 70s and 80s and 90s, mainly the 70s and 80s, the amenities in those buildings have needed to be upgraded. End of trip has been a very consistent one, particularly building on what the other panelists have said here, increased cycling, walking, all those types of things. The new buildings have, but the older ones have had to add them and build them into their structures somewhere, whether it's parking garage space where you now see bike cages down there, but showers and gyms and that kind of thing. What you're also seeing is an upgrading in the actual building systems. And so the new generation of buildings, the power systems, the heating, the HVAC systems are worlds apart in terms of what has been generally in some of Vancouver's older buildings. And so there has been some demand by tenants, depending on their company's kind of environmental position, a desire to be in a newer building that has more efficient systems. It also reduces their costs over a longer period of time, but it allows them to turn to employees and say, look, this is what we're doing to help the environment. And that has led to an increased embrace by various building standards, green building standards. There's a number of different systems. The City of Vancouver has required those in some of their constructions and implemented them into the building codes. And so as a result, again, you've got the older generation kind of forced to being upgraded to kind of keep up with that. In regards to the green space itself, I mean, you're seeing more of an integration of functional plazas as opposed to before where a plaza was more of a ornamentation. The old Thunderdome that used to be over there, which is gone now with a new building going there. But that was an example of a plaza that was not as functional as perhaps it could have been. But you're seeing that very different now. That space is now being used so employees can come out and enjoy lunch. There's services and amenities there, whether it's restaurants or public art. So there's a lot more of an integration of functional space. I wouldn't say there's necessarily more green space, but more functional space with some green in it. But yeah, there are a number of different factors. And again, you've got some of the older buildings replacing large water features, which are kind of dated and, for some represent a waste of water that evaporates in the middle of the summer and are being, again, used more as a functional thing, as an employee amenity, but as well just as just makes the city look nicer. And it provides more space for employees, for residents, and for tourists when they're visiting.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to ask this question, our last question of Shivam, and then I'm going to transition to the podium again. So I'm paying attention to what you're saying and how you're answering this. Vancouver is home to 3 of Canada's 5 tech unicorns, startups valued over $1 billion. Maybe Slack is still in that group, namely Slack, Hootsuite. What are some notable tech innovations that have been developed downtown? Are there any trends in the types of tech companies establishing themselves downtown?
Maybe I'll answer the second part first. I mean, trends is a little bit tricky because there's always trends depending on the time period you look at. So I think historically, because we've had a very strong animations and visual effects cluster, so that has given rise to a very strong gaming sector. So a lot of tech related to the gaming industry was coming out of Vancouver. EA Sports is a perfect example. Kabam is one. Blackbird Interactive. CryptoKitties, which is, who would imagine? It's one of the first blockchain-backed, gaming apps, and it's a worldwide phenomena that came out of Vancouver. And then we moved on to more of software as a service start platforms. You've got the classics like Facebooks and Microsofts, and then we moved into the digital management, which is like the Hootsuites of the world that came up. And then in the past recent few years, I would say, Vancouver's really taken a charge on the emerging tech. It's very exciting because if you look at the world, emerging tech is growing all over, but Vancouver particularly, a recent startup genome sort of study. We're one of the world's top blockchain ecosystems in the world. That says a lot because that speaks to the talent that is coming out of the city and the innovation that is coming out of the city. So one of the first Bitcoin ATMs is in Vancouver. And that's, it's a cool thing if you're coming from a tech perspective. So talking about innovations, definitely that's one. And in terms of sectors also, if you're looking at blockchain, like I said, the Startup Genome Report, we're definitely progressing. And now recently AI as well. So Fujitsu's World AI Research Center is opening up here. we've got Borealis AI, which is a pan-Canadian institute for AI research, opened up in Vancouver also. So a lot of emerging tech you're starting to see. And of course, that is in addition to the classic software as a service type platforms and the digital management type platforms and the gaming sector, which is already thriving and growing. So overall, I think we can't say it's one or the other, but a combination of a lot of different technologies that is making it a very thriving ecosystem. The most notable, like you said, the unicorns are definitely the most notable. You've got the Slacks, the Hootsuite, Avison is another one. And of course, in the blockchain world, we've got, Vanbex was one, which was the largest Bitcoin offering ever. Was a Vancouver company. So I think these are the more notable trends, and of course, in addition to much more innovation that is happening in the city.
Thanks for dragging that answer out longer while I was trying to work out the technology. You must have been reading my mind. So we do have some questions that were submitted via Slido. And so I'll take off my glasses while I read some of them. Do you think we have enough public space? Do tech professionals use them, considering most tech businesses are on the internet? So that might sound like a question for Shivam and Andrew to respond to.
I mean, I would suggest, depending on where you are located in downtown, outdoor amenities are very close. No matter if you're in Yaletown, you're in Gastown, you're downtown, you can get to the water, you can get to the space. You are seeing increased utilization of the public space, or better use of the public space that's available, instead of having it filled with a kind of pointless water feature, perhaps. And so you're seeing, benches put in, food trucks, food carts, all of that kind of thing, which is kind of energizing these outdoor areas. And while we might not have, a big green park right in the city, we do have one right next to the city. And you are literally pretty much within 10 minutes of the water almost anywhere downtown. So I would suggest that the space downtown is probably suited for the tech workforce, who ultimately may or may not be that interested in getting off out of their terminal anyway.
Shivam, did you want to comment?
Yeah. I think that's also, and to add also, historically, absolutely, and even now, working remotely and satellite workstations are a massive part of the tech industry, but increasingly so, there's a changing attitude where we within the community are realizing the importance of physical collaboration and being close to each other, because that allows for such amazing collaboration to happen. And that's really driven by, if you look at the campuses, the Facebook campus, the Google campus, the Netflix campus, if you look at that model, even though they allow and promote satellite work culture, it is still very much embedded that you come to the office, because again, the cool office culture comes from that collaborative approach where it allows for organic ideas to flow. And really, we often underestimate the importance of that, but it's so important in the tech world also, and increasingly so, people are recognizing it. So I think having access to those spaces allows for this to happen also. I think it's, and like you pointed, Vancouver downtown is a great example where we do have access to those facilities. And I think increasingly so, we'll see them being utilized more and more by the tech world particularly.
Okay. I'm not sure, I'm going to ask this question because it has come up before. But we've talked about all the growth that we're going to anticipate with 5.1 million square feet of new office space. And I'm going to just paraphrase the question, but what about affordable housing nearby? Any suggestions from any of you? You may not have the right answer, but any suggestions on how we can tackle this issue of having affordable housing near downtown? Any comments about that? I mean, what role can we all play in starting to advocate for more affordable housing? Is this something that maybe VEC is focused on? I'm putting you on the spot, but...
No, affordable housing is such an important topic, right? Because with the rise of the economy of a city, it is so imperative that we take care of all our populations or all segments of our society, because it's easy to get, isolate a certain segment from the other as the economy grows. I mean, Bay Area is a perfect example where that has happened. And I think Vancouver as a city, I'm quite proud to say we are quite proactive. Even though we have challenges, we are quite proactive in trying to tackle that issue. And at the Economic Commission, certainly there's a huge focus on undertaking research around what can we do to address that. So making use of industrial spaces in a better way is one. and ensuring that we bring together the business community and the industry into these conversations early on is so important, that they understand also the value of proactively engaging in this issue to address the housing crisis here.
I'm not putting any of the counselors on the spot here, but there are a number of counselors here this afternoon that you may want to talk to afterwards with specific questions about what's being done, questions about Lyft and Uber, and there was questions about the hotel space, and then this question about affordable housing. I can tell you that our organization is also becoming more outspoken on the issue of building affordable housing within the city itself, and we'll be advocating and supporting a number of rezonings coming forward to council over the course of the next little while. So we've decided that as an organization we have a role to play, and I would encourage others to do the same and speak out. We are going to wrap this up because I mentioned that we do have a hard start with our annual general meeting. But I want to thank our panelists. We truly appreciate the time you put into this to prepare. They did have the questions in advance. We didn't want to put them on the spot. We also wanted to make this an interesting and informative session for you. So please join me in giving them one more round of applause for sharing their expertise with us today. And a big thank you to our two sponsors of State of Downtown, Boughton Law, with Luca Chiton here, who's our vice chair. He's with Boughton Law, and Brooke Pooney Associates, and Gary Pooney is our chair. And thank you very much for your support. We greatly appreciate it.